The ship cut through the sky like a wound in the clouds, trailing light and judgment as it vanished into the stratosphere. Her armor still gleamed in places, despite the ash clinging to it, but the gleam meant nothing now. She remained kneeling, one knee pressed into the cracked red dirt of the desolate world below, eyes locked upward until the glow of the engines became just another trembling star. Her long ears, once a symbol of her species' grace and poise, twitched involuntarily in the wind. A wind that carried only sand and silence. Corin stood behind a rusted boulder that had definitely not been shaped by nature, holding a half-charged stunner and a bag of freeze-dried apple chips, watching her as though he'd just seen a myth decide to take a nap. She hadn't moved in minutes. He wasn't entirely sure she was still alive, though that would be terribly ironic given the dramatic exit of what had clearly been her ride. Not that irony was in short supply on this planet. He had been stuck here 3 days now, which meant the local insect life had declared his legs a diplomatic zone. He took a cautious step forward and crunched loudly on a chip. She didn't react. Another step, another crunch. Then she spoke, so quietly he wasn't sure the wind hadn't made it up. "Am I really that worthless?" Her voice didn't shake. It didn't beg. It simply landed, soft, blunt, flat, and cut through the air like something final. Corin froze mid-chew. He wasn't ready for emotional warfare before breakfast. He said eloquently, lowering the chip bag. "I'm gonna assume that was rhetorical. Otherwise, I feel wildly underqualified." She turned. Her face was elegant, alien, beautiful in the kind of way that made humans invent poetry they couldn't pronounce. Her long black hair was tied back into a practical knot, a few strands licking her cheek in the wind. Her eyes, silver with pinprick pupils, narrowed with the unmistakable expression of a predator, wondering if the local fauna counted as protein. "Did you follow me?" she asked. "Well, I was here first," Corin replied, pointing vaguely toward a collection of solar panels now buried in sand. "Crash-landed. I'd say small universe, but yours looks considerably larger and, more explodey." She rose to her feet in one graceful movement. Like gravity had been a courtesy she was done entertaining. Her armor, etched with pale bioluminescent lines, adjusted itself with a soft hiss. He noted a single broken plate at her left shoulder and a crack along one gauntlet. Either she'd been through hell or she'd punched it and moved on. "I don't need assistance," she said, sharp and direct. "If you value your life, leave." "Wow. Galactic standard for thank you for the warm welcome is getting stricter," Corin muttered. "Listen, lady, Commander, Admiral, abandoned space elf, whatever you are, you're stuck, same as me. And last I checked, this planet is famous for its charming plasma storms, roving insectoid horrors, and absolutely no reason to exist. So, maybe we could not do the mutual throat-slashing thing before lunch?" She stared at him. He wasn't sure whether it was fury or indigestion building behind those eyes. "My name is Thalith," she said at last, "former commander of the Yran Vanguard." "This was not my choice." Corin raised an eyebrow. "Getting dumped on Murder Dustball Alpha? No, I imagine not. Unless you're into performance exile." Thalith looked away. The hardness in her shoulders, the kind that came from years of command, faltered for just a moment. Long enough for him to see that her fingers had curled into fists so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. "I gave them an order they would not follow. They chose fear." "That's usually how mutinies go, yeah." He offered a hand. Corin Pell, amateur mechanic, full-time pessimist, accidental stowaway on a mining vessel that thought it could shortcut through a wormhole. Spoiler, it couldn't. Thalith didn't take his hand, but she didn't kill him either. Progress. He motioned toward a nearby ridge. "I've got shelter over there. A little half-buried recon pod with just enough charge to keep water filtered and my socks dry. Not much, but beats brooding in open terrain where the sky sometimes screams." "I do not brood," she said, following him anyway. The recon pod was smaller than advertised, which was to say it wasn't really a pod so much as a reinforced barrel with hopes and dreams. Thaleth had to duck to enter, and even then her ears brushed the ceiling. Corin handed her a canister of water, which she sniffed suspiciously before sipping. You know, he said, sitting on the only crate not occupied by tools, you're handling this pretty well. Most people cry, scream, maybe write a sad poem or two when they're betrayed and marooned. You seem more like the file a complaint with a plasma cannon type. I have been trained not to weep, she said simply. Right. That explains the general battle goddess from a dying opera vibe. He paused. But for the record, it's okay if you want to break something. Start with that wrench. It keeps mocking me. Thalith said nothing, but her hand did hover near the wrench for just a second. Then she sat beside him, barely, the bench groaning under her weight, and stared through the viewport at the swirling dust beyond. They left me because I refused to kill civilians, she said finally. My people do not allow hesitation. I showed it, and so I was removed. Corin blinked. Wow, that's intense. Where I come from, the only thing that gets you fired is microwaving fish in the office break room. She tilted her head. Microwaving what? Never mind. Silence fell again, but it wasn't cold. Not anymore. I don't think you're worthless, he said, quieter now, just in case it helps to hear. Her expression didn't change, not at first, but then, barely perceptible, her eyes blinked slower, her posture eased by a fraction. She glanced at him with something that might have been curiosity, or confusion, or the slow dawning realization that this strange, sarcastic human might be the only one who hadn't yet abandoned her. Thank you, she said, almost. Then the ceiling cracked, and both of them jolted upright as a low growl echoed from outside. Corin grabbed his stunner. Okay, just FYI, if that's another plasma wolf, I vote you get to punch this one. I'm emotionally drained. Thalith stood, her blade already unsheathed. Agreed. You're far too delicate. See? Now that's the spirit. The thing outside had too many legs and the wrong number of faces. That was Corin's first thought as it scrambled over the rocks, chittering like a broken radio. The second thought was that it looked hungry, and the third was that it looked specifically hungry for either titanium or sarcasm, and he was fresh out of the first. Thalith stepped in front of him, her plasma blade humming to life with a sound that was part weapon, part warning. The creature hesitated, briefly, then it charged. Thalith met it head-on, her body a blur of motion that defied physics and modesty. Her blade sliced through one of its frontal appendages, but it didn't stop. It screamed, no, harmonized, a piercing, discordant tone that sent a migraine directly into Corin's future. He stumbled backward, trying to aim his stunner, then realized he'd left the safety on. Again. Classic, he muttered, fumbling with the switch as Thalith vaulted onto the creature's back. She drove the blade deep into its thorax, if it had a thorax. Biology wasn't his field, and twisted. The thing shrieked, flailed, tried to throw her off, but she clung with a grip that could shame gravity. Finally, it collapsed with a wet, fizzing sound. Thalith landed on her feet, barely winded, covered in something that steamed. Is it dead? Corin asked, still aiming the stunner at its twitching limb. No, she said calmly. It's composing a farewell sonata. Corin lowered the weapon, rubbing his temples. I didn't realize sarcasm was part of year-end military doctrine. It's a tertiary discipline, mostly used in diplomacy. She wiped her blade clean on a piece of its hide, then gestured toward the horizon where the storm clouds churned in sickly green spirals. We cannot remain here. The predators are adapting to the noise signature of our equipment. That's the nicest way anyone's ever told me I attract monsters, he sighed. All right, I know a place. About 3 clicks northeast. An old relay station, pre-collapse tech. Might still have a comm beacon, or at least something with buttons I can pretend to fix. They gathered what little they had. Thalith scavenged a power cell from the creature's remains, muttering something in her native tongue that Corin chose to interpret as a prayer or a curse, possibly both. The journey began under the fractured sky, each step accompanied by distant thunder and the occasional high-frequency keening of more wildlife reconsidering its dinner options. Corin tried to keep up. He really did. But Thalith walked like someone who'd made treaties and conquered moons before breakfast. By comparison, he moved like someone who'd spent his adult life fixing vending machines in low-gravity cafeterias. So, he panted, stumbling over a rock that had clearly committed to being in the way. Any hobbies? Or is near-invincible exile with questionable people skills your whole thing? She didn't look back. I once cultivated a freshwater bloom garden aboard the Irinth flagship. Huh, and here I thought you were all doom and dismemberment. I am not without balance. She glanced sideways, just a flicker. Though the flowers did eventually weaponize. It was an oversight. He chuckled despite the ache in his calves. See? This is the kind of bonding I was promised when I joined the interstellar community. As they crested a ridge, the relay station came into view. It was less a tower and more a collapsed heap of girders wrapped around a satellite dish that looked like it had survived multiple love affairs with meteors. Still, parts of it flickered with residual energy, and that was hope. The interior was tight, rusted, and smelled faintly of ozone and regret. Corin got to work, prying open a maintenance panel while Thaleth explored the upper levels. After 30 minutes of arguing with a terminal that spoke only in obsolete code, he managed to coax a flicker of life from the relay console. Okay, he muttered, tapping furiously. If I route the signal through the compression buffer and amplify it with that leftover power cell, we might be able to broadcast a signal strong enough to hit orbit, assuming, of course, the laws of physics are feeling generous today. Thaleth dropped from the upper platform like a feathered guillotine, landing beside him with all the elegance of a trained executioner. I found a functioning radar node, scanning range limited, atmospheric interference. Great, he said. So we're yelling into a hurricane with a paper megaphone. Classic Tuesday. She examined the screen. Can it transmit encrypted bursts? Maybe, if I reroute the bypass capacitor and slap it hard enough. Proceed. He worked in silence for a moment, fingers dancing across cracked glass. You know, he said eventually, I used to dream about moments like this. She arched a brow. You dreamed of dying with dignity in a rusted corpse of a forgotten outpost? Okay, not exactly like this, but the whole team up with a mysterious alien warrior bit? Yeah, I had that one. Usually involved less probable death and more interstellar romance. Occasionally, karaoke. She made a noise that might have been a scoff or a laugh. Your fantasies are inefficient. They're called aspirations. Thank you very much. A spark flew from the console. Corin swore, sucked a burnt finger, then grinned. Got it. Broadcasting on a loop. If anyone's listening, they'll pick us up in... He checked the output. 9 hours, give or take 5. Depending on solar flare interference, of course. She nodded. We will wait. No offense, he said, sitting back with a sigh, but you don't seem like the waiting type. I waited 6 hours in silence once to avoid detection during a diplomatic assassination. Corin blinked. What even is that sentence? It was a Tuesday. They settled into the makeshift control room, the silence between them no longer tense, just worn in. Comfortable, in a battlefield-worn, maybe we don't die kind of way. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the ancient relay hummed softly with borrowed life. Corin looked over. Hey, Thaleth. Yes? You ever wonder what we'll do if no one answers? She met his gaze, calm and steady. Then we build our own ship. With spare parts and snark? With purpose. He smirked. I've got a few spare purposes lying around. She didn't smile, but she didn't not smile either. And for now, that was enough. The night on the relay station stretched like an old neural tape loop, crackling, restless, and constantly threatening to rewind to horror. The wind outside had changed from howling to something more deliberate, like it had opinions about their presence. Inside, Corin tinkered with a portable heater salvaged from a mining crate marked, "Do not remove from subsurface zone," which of course he had removed because cold toes were stronger than regulation. Thaleth sat cross-legged on a supply crate, inspecting her gauntlet with surgical detachment. The light from Corin's patch job heater glinted along the fractal circuitry in her armor, briefly revealing lines of etched script that shifted under the eye. I never asked, Corin said, tightening a bolt with a tool that may have once been a spoon. What exactly does that armor do besides look terrifying? It regulates power flows through my muscle weave, amplifies reaction time, and deflects low-grade plasma. Also dispenses nutrient gel when commanded. Nutrient gel, fancy. Any flavor options? Thalith didn't look up. Neutral is optimal for survival conditions. He paused. So, it tastes like what? Guilt? Sadness? Beige? She finally met his eyes. It tastes like endurance. He made a face. See, you could have said it's like chewing on ambition, and it would have sounded inspirational. But now I'm picturing cold toothpaste with the personality of sand. She said nothing. A moment later, her gauntlet emitted a low whir, and a tiny nozzle deployed. A thin stream of translucent gel slid onto her palm. She held it out to him. Try it? Corin hesitated. Is this a test of bravery or a diplomatic insult avoidance drill? Yes. He sniffed it, then cautiously licked. Tastes like disappointment in a can. Thalith blinked once. Accurate. They passed a few more hours in mutual silence, broken only by Corin arguing with the heater and Thalith occasionally tilting her head like she was analyzing the structural weaknesses of his personality. At 0342 station time, the relay console chirped once. Just a single weak blip of life. Corin lunged for it. That's either a signal or an extremely optimistic ant. The screen flickered, cycled through dead protocols, then stabilized. A message, compressed, short range, tagged with an unknown encryption signature. Thalith stood. It's not rescue. Corin squinted. Number no, it's a bounty transmission. Someone pinged this relay for active fugitives. She was already checking her blade, recalibrating the power cell. They know I'm alive. They know we're alive, he corrected. Look, coordinates. They're close. Too close for coincidence. Thalith's expression didn't change, but her movements quickened. We leave now. Right. Good plan. Evade murderous bounty hunters first, cry about existential betrayal later. They packed in minutes. Corin grabbed the relay's power converter, shoved it into his bag like it owed him money, and followed Thalith out into the storm. Dust spiraled in vertical ribbons, static lightning branching across the low sky like roots reaching downward. They didn't talk. No time. Just movement. Running. Sliding. Climbing through dead canyons and collapsed hulls of failed escape craft from wars no one remembered. Corin's breath came ragged. Thalith moved like gravity owed her favors. They found shelter beneath a broken survey drone, its wings bent like a collapsed spider. As they ducked under the shell, the signal pinged again. Louder, closer. Thalith activated a cloaking disc from her belt. We're not outpacing them. We ambush. Corin looked at her like she'd grown a second pair of ears. You say that like I'm built for ambushes. I once tripped over my own reflection. Remain behind cover. Use your stunner only when you see their optic flare. He pointed at her blade. What are you using? She raised her gauntlet. Regret. The hunters arrived 20 minutes later. 3 of them. Armored, silent, weaponized shadows with refractive cloaks and targeting drones that crawled like insects through the dirt. Corin tried not to breathe too loud. Thalith waited until the first one passed the wreck's edge. Then she moved. Her attack wasn't loud. It was precise, efficient. One swing, and the first hunter dropped in a hiss of severed wires and blood. The others turned, too late. Corin aimed at the one raising a charge rifle. His finger twitched. The stunner whined. Blue light cracked across the darkness. The shot hit. The hunter spasmed and dropped. Corin let out a noise that might have been victory or indigestion. The third vanished. Stealth tech. Not good. Thalith ducked low, eyes scanning the shadows. Watch the ridge! A shot rang out. Her shoulder jerked. She stumbled, hissed something that didn't need translating. Corin saw the shimmer of the hunter's cloak on the ridge, aimed his stunner, but it was charging. Too slow. So he grabbed the power converter from his bag and hurled it. It hit the hunter's location with a heavy clang, breaking the cloak's illusion. The hunter spun, right as Thalith's blade arced upward and ended the conversation. She dropped to one knee. Corin rushed over. You okay? That shot looked bad. I've had worse, she said through clenched teeth. Once fought a Ryzak nest with a fractured femur. Sure, but this time you have me, and I have no useful skills besides sarcasm and creative battery theft. He helped her back to her feet. The wound was already sealing, a pulsing mesh crawling over her skin from within the armor. Self-repairing nanosutures, she explained. Painful, efficient, just like you. They scavenged what they could from the hunters, then moved again, slower now. The silence between them had changed shape. Less wary, more weighted. Corin spoke as they walked. Why'd you really refuse that order? The one that got you dumped here? She was quiet a long time. Then, they wanted me to destroy a colony that hadn't raised weapons. I saw children in the data feed. They called it statistical loss. I called it cowardice. He nodded. You broke the algorithm. Yes. You ever think you might have saved the urine from themselves? She didn't answer, but her shoulders seemed lighter, just slightly. By the time the sun cracked over the ridge, if that burning, squirming sphere even counted as a sun, they found what looked like the husk of a pre-Yran transport vessel embedded in the cliffside. Corin whistled. That's ancient. Thalith stepped forward, reverent. Older than my empire. Possibly older than yours. He poked a loose panel. Think it's haunted? Highly likely. He grinned. Good. Haunted ships have better snacks. She shook her head just once. But this time, unmistakably, she smiled. The ship embedded in the cliff had no name, at least none that survived the time and stone that had crushed its hull. Half its body was buried in black rock, the other half exposed like a fossil caught mid-flight. Corin pressed his palm against the scorched entrance panel and expected nothing. The ship, however, had other ideas. It buzzed once, angrily, like a machine woken before its preferred century, and slid the door open with a wheeze that sounded suspiciously like regret. Inside, the corridors were curved and seamless, formed from a material that didn't reflect light so much as consider it, then decline. Symbols moved along the walls, shifting as Corin watched them, like they were translating themselves through thought rather than language. I'm gonna call this decor-style eldritch minimalism, he muttered. Thalith followed in silence, hand on her blade. She didn't trust the air here. It didn't feel stale. It felt intentional, as though the ship had filtered time as well as oxygen. Her eyes narrowed as they passed what might have once been a console, though now it just projected a slow-turning spiral of unreadable glyphs and a pulse that throbbed at the base of the skull. Is this vessel alive? She asked. Corin tapped the screen with one finger. It beeped in a pitch only dogs, or perhaps multi-dimensional engineers, could hear. Not sure, but it's definitely in a mood. They moved deeper. The walls curved in ways that defied geometry, leading to a central chamber with a glass dome overhead. Through it, the roiling sky framed their reflections. Small, mismatched, uncertain. At the room's center stood a pedestal with a strange, inactive core, surrounded by petrified vines fused into the flooring. Corin approached the core and paused. So, do I poke it, offer it friendship, threaten it with poetry? Caution, Thalith warned. Ancient technology is rarely grateful. Noted, but I think it's calling to me, in a vague, non-legally binding way. He reached forward. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the core blinked once, twice, then bathed the chamber in a soft, golden glow. The floor beneath them vibrated as panels retracted, revealing dormant pathways and lights that flickered back to life after what had to be centuries of stubborn slumber. Thalith stepped back. You activated it. I always activate things, he muttered, usually by accident. The core projected a series of images into the air. Not static ones, memories perhaps, fractured glimpses of civilizations long gone, towering cities formed from sound waves, creatures that moved in mathematical rhythm, a war fought with time loops and memory theft. And then, silence, a black sun swallowing the last signal. Corin stared, mouth open. I think we just got shown the history of a people who invented recursive architecture and then accidentally folded themselves out of existence. Thalith's expression had darkened. That sun, it matches the description of an extinction event recorded in Lost Year in History, the silent collapse. I prefer collapses that are loud and come with warning signs. Another pulse echoed through the ship. This time Corin flinched. Okay, that wasn't a memory. That felt like a ping. Thalith nodded, drawing her weapon. Something else is awake. The chamber door closed behind them. Slowly, deliberately. Corin spun. Right. So we're inside an ancient spaceship with a sentient memory core, maybe a pocket universe folded into its hallway, and it just locked us in. This is either the worst escape room ever or the start of a very awkward adoption. Thalith ignored him, scanning the room with focused precision. There's a consciousness, distant, faint, but aware. Corin frowned. How can you tell? Because it's not yours. The ship spoke, not aloud, not in sound. It slid a concept into their thoughts like a whisper in a dream. Purpose, lost, direction. Corin blinked. It's asking for instructions? It's been dormant for millennia, Thalith murmured, waiting for a new directive. Well, I'm flattered, but I usually don't lead ancient starships unless it comes with benefits. The core shimmered again. More images, this time of themselves. Thalith, Corin, walking together through futures that hadn't happened yet. Worlds unnamed, shadows that followed them. One image lingered, the two of them standing at the edge of something vast, with light bending around them like a promise or a threat. Thalith turned to him. It sees us as pilots. I don't even have a license. You led it here, or it led you. Either way, I don't like being anyone's prophetic side quest. The ship pulsed once more, and then the doors opened again. Not to the cliffside, but a tunnel through rock and time that hadn't been there before. Thalith stepped forward. It wants to be used. Corin hesitated. So do a lot of things. That doesn't mean they should be. They walked. The tunnel led to a lower chamber, where the ship's controls had once resided, now reformed into a throne-like seat surrounded by hollow interfaces. When Thalith stepped near, they lit up in sequence, reacting to her presence. Corin stayed back. You sure you're okay with this? I mean, we came here running from bounty hunters, not looking to become galactic co-captains of the Ghost Express? Thalith didn't answer. Not right away. Then, this ship is forgotten, like me, abandoned by its creators, but it still has purpose, and so do I. He exhaled. Well, when you put it like that, it's hard to argue. Also, this chair looks way too big for me anyway. She sat. The ship shuddered, not violently but with relief, like a machine finally remembering its name. The system stabilized. Readouts scrolled in languages they didn't know but somehow understood. Shields, navigation, power. Something called chronotether stabilization. Corin didn't ask. He joined her at the console. Any chance this thing can get us off this planet before the next wave of bounty hunters shows up? Thalith adjusted the controls. Not only off planet, it can take us to places they cannot follow. Great, let's pick a nice quiet system with no carnivorous storms or sentient taxes. As the engines began to hum, a soft voice echoed from the ship, not spoken but somehow heard. You are not the last. You are the first. Corin blinked. Okay, now it's doing cryptic encouragement. We need a manual. The ship rose. Through the rock, through the sky, into orbit, quietly, cleanly, like it had never crashed but simply paused. As they broke the atmosphere, Corin turned to her. Hey, Thalith? Yes? This doesn't make you my boss now, right? She looked straight ahead, lips twitching. No. Good. A beat passed. Co-captains then, he grinned. As long as I get to pick the music. She nodded once, gravely. That will be negotiated. The ship drifted through the edge of uncharted space, where stars thinned and physics got nervous. Corin had never seen a sky so full of emptiness. No satellites, no trade beacons, no lists of forbidden sectors that started with, "Please don't go here" in 6 languages. Just silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's ancient engines and the occasional disgruntled beep from a panel trying to translate them. Thalith stood at the viewport, arms crossed behind her back. Every bit the commander she no longer officially was. Her armor had begun to dull where the auto-repair systems had reached their limits, but she wore it like a second skin still. Corin sat upside down in a swiveling chair someone probably hadn't meant to swivel, peeling open a ration bar with the delicacy of a raccoon faced with a vending machine. So, he said, mouth full, this is what freedom tastes like. Kinda plasticky. She didn't turn. There is nothing here, no signals, no scans returning. This region is unrecorded. He took a bite and tried not to gag. Well, it's either a cosmic dead zone or someone's idea of a very exclusive retirement plan. Silence, but not unfriendly. Then, we have distance. That buys us time. Corin flipped upright. Time for what? You said yourself, there's no going back to the Iron Empire. You're branded. I'm just an inconvenient witness. You are more than that. He blinked. Wow. If I had a heart monitor, it just beeped. Thaleth finally turned, something softer in her gaze. When I was exiled, I believed I had failed in a singular moment. One decision, one refusal. But it wasn't just that. The failure began long before, in the belief that worth comes from fear and leadership from unquestioning force. You showed me something else. Corin shifted, suddenly unsure what to do with his face. Yeah, well, I also showed you how to open nutrient rations with a fuse cutter, so let's call it even. The ship beeped again, but differently this time. Brighter, less irritated. A new system had come online. The AI, whatever it was, had been busy. A panel opened near the bridge and revealed a star map they'd never accessed. It shimmered with possibility. Corridors of old, unused paths, places where space folded like origami and let you slip through the creases. Some marked, some blinking faintly. One glowed gold. Thaleth approached. This is not from your species. Definitely not, Corin said, mouth half full again. Humans would have labeled each one with danger, extra danger, or free Wi-Fi. The gold path pulsed, a gentle nudge. Thaleth frowned. A destination? Corin shrugged. Or a suggestion, or the universe's version of, trust me, bro. The ship didn't wait. It aligned itself, humming with approval, and drifted forward. No jump, no warp, just movement, smooth and implausible. The stars bent around them, and for a moment, Corin thought he could hear music. Notes that hadn't existed yet, promising something new. They emerged into a system so old its sun barely remembered how to shine. Floating before them was a structure, not a planet, not a station, a construct, massive, elegant, formed from spirals of light and magnetic stone, orbiting an artificial core. It pulsed with potential, and it was empty. Whatever lived here, Corin said, standing, they're long gone. Thaleth studied it. Or they left it, waiting. The AI chimed again, a message unspooled from its memory banks, revealed in light. To those abandoned, to those who abandoned, this place is sanctuary, not from danger, but from legacy. Here you begin again. Corin swallowed. It's offering us a reset. No empire, Thaleth said. No bounty. No command chain. No cafeteria, he added. She smiled. They landed. The platform welcomed them with no defense systems, no interrogations, just lighted paths and the slow activation of dormant systems. The construct had everything: resources, energy, an ecosystem cultivated inside vast biodomes, untouched. Corin sat in the dome's garden later that day, eating something that tasted like blueberries and moonlight. Thaleth was beside him, armor partially removed, breathing in the strange new air. I've been thinking, he said, watching the simulated sunset. We could make something here. Not a civilization, not a rebellion, just a home. She didn't answer for a while. Then, I used to believe my life was the sum of orders followed and given. Now I wonder if it's the choices I make when no one's watching. Well, he said, leaning back, no one's watching now. The days passed. They repaired what they could, mapped the construct, built a rhythm. Corin taught her how to fix a hydro-regulator with chewing gum. She taught him how to disable an energy trap by listening to its harmonic pulse. They joked. They argued. They laughed slowly, like it was a language they were relearning. One night beneath a sky not quite real but more honest than most, Thaleth stood by the edge of the dome, watching stars drift by. Corin joined her. You still miss them? Number not anymore. She looked at him. But I do wonder if they will ever regret it. He shrugged. If they don't, they weren't worth the wondering. She tilted her head. You have changed. So have you. She nodded. Good. In time, a message arrived from a distant traveler, encrypted, respectful. It asked if the sanctuary was real, if refuge still existed. Thalith read it. Corin watched her. We could ignore it, he said. Or, she replied, we could welcome them. He grinned. Then we'd have to build guest quarters, and rules, and probably a garden that doesn't try to eat people. She looked at the stars. Maybe we do it differently this time. Corin raised his hand. Then we begin with one rule. No nutrient gel. Thalith extended her hand. Agreed. They shook on it, and far above them, the stars kept shifting, quietly recording the story of a woman once feared across the galaxy, and the human who called her home, not because she needed saving, but because they both deserved a second beginning.